Hello, thanks for joining back if you even watched this video. Um, but today I want to talk about the importance and subject about identifying as Native American. But in this video, I want to go into maybe more details. It won't be long, but there's definitely some things that I think people should recognize when it comes to, identifying as Hispanic and Latino. So for many years, people from Mexico and other Latin American countries have been identified as Hispanic or Latino in the United States. But this label was created by the United States Census Bureau in the 1970s to describe people from, basically Spanish-speaking countries in Central and South America, as well as those from the Caribbean. But however, this doesn't accurately represent the diverse cultures and histories of these regions, right? And one of those examples could be that sometimes people in the United States basically kind of only recognize people really being Hispanic, or, but I get, if you're from a specific country, that's almost, at least in America, that's a race, right? So if you say, I'm half Mexican and I'm half Puerto Rican, or if I'm, half Canadian, half Mexican, that's not a thing, right? Because you're not half Canadian and half Mexican. You're either like half European or half Native American, right? Or you're half whatever it might be, but it depends on the race, right? You can't be technically two nationalities, or you can't be half nationality of this and half nationality of this. You can have culture, like you can have half Canadian culture and half Mexican culture, half whatever country culture your parents may come from, but you don't necessarily have, how would I say, that's not a race. Basically, what I'm trying to say is a country's not a race. And at least in America, when someone says they're Hispanic or something, they look at that as a race, and also they may look at their country as also maybe like a race because they say, half Mexican or half whatever it might be. But, a European person can be from Mexico, be born in Mexico, and then that person can immigrate to the United States and he carries that Mexican culture, and then he can marry just another European person in the United States, and then their kid might say, well, I'm half Mexican and half, American. And that doesn't really make sense, right? It's almost like they're saying it like because they think it's a race, right? They think Mexican is a race when it's definitely not. So I think identifying people not as Hispanic or Latino can clarify a lot of things, especially in the United States, where people get confused for Hispanic and Latino as a race, as more as like maybe people that just speak it, right? Because people that are actually Hispanic are from Spain, right? And people that are Latino are from Italy. But people from Central and South America, they could have roots dating all the way back there because of colonialization, right, from like Europeans. But they themselves, I would guess the majority don't, especially if they're brown. Like, I highly doubt that most brown people have roots dating all the way back there. They identify more with the country than the actual term itself, right? So another thing is that if you're from Mexico, it's more accurate and meaningful to identify as Native American because Mexico is home of many indigenous peoples with distinct cultures, languages, and traditions. In fact, according to the National Commission for the Development of Indigenous People, there are 68 officially recognized indigenous groups in Mexico. These groups have faced discrimination, marginalization for centuries, and their rights and needs are often ignored by the government and society. So, the what I just read is very true. I mean, if you look up videos, these videos might be in Spanish, but if you look up videos about discrimination in Mexico, you could see that if you dress Native American or Indigenous, right? So if like these communities dress a certain type of way, and if you dress like that and you're brown, you're gonna get discriminated against. You're gonna told you're an Indio or you're Native American, right? And they're gonna look at you as less, right? They're not gonna look at you as the same as them. That you're just less for whatever reason, right? Well, not for whatever reason. There's a specific reason. It's because of the caste system that was put upon us by by the Spanish. So if you were Native American, you were basically at the bottom, right? They wanted to erase anything Native American. They burned our books, tore down our statues, right? Built their churches on our temples. They just destroyed everything. And not only that, they want to destroy, well, they kind of did destroy the identity, right? Being proud of being Native American. So these terms are very colonial, and they almost, I wouldn't say almost, they want you to be not native. Like they don't want you to feel native. They don't seek for you to seek your roots, right? They want you to be basically a stranger in your own home, right? So if you're Native American and you don't feel Native American, right? You might feel Hispanic or Latino because you speak Spanish. You have a Spanish name. Maybe you're Catholic. Like all of these things were imposed on the people specifically for that reason, right? Nobody converted or wanted to convert to Christian or Catholicism, right? I mean, you can look at the books. You can look at the history where people were literally tortured, killed, murdered, raped to convert, right? And it wasn't even that successful, right? Because if you're Mexican, you more than likely recognize or see that people pray to the Virgin Mary more than they might actually pray to like the Christian God, right, or the Catholic God, right, or Jesus. They mostly pray to the Virgin Mary, but the Virgin Mary isn't a god. She's not anything. She's just a person that gave birth to Jesus. But to Mexican people, she makes miracles, or she does it, she does other things. And that the reason for that is because she's basically, I guess, like the clone or the replacement for, or like an Aztec, or, they're called the Mexica, but to not confuse you guys, the Aztec god Tontonantzin, right? The, like, Mother Nature. She basically was a replacement for her, so the Native Americans would be more easily convertible, right? So they could convert a lot more easy, right? They were just telling them, oh, this is the same person, right? So I mean, I think that also has to do with identifying as Native American, right? So if you identify as Native American, you're going to not only identify as Native American, but you're going to be more prone to maybe seek out your roots, right? There's not only the Aztecs in Mexico. There's over, like I said, 68 indigenous groups, right? They have a diverse culture. They have a diverse language, right? And a way of living. And these people, well, Native Americans aren't dying out, but the culture is dying out for sure, right? The language is a big issue where that's dying out like really, really, really fast, especially with the exposure, I think, of the internet, where people are starting to see more things maybe in Spanish, or starting to see more things in English. And there's no media for these languages, right? So if you're watching anime or you're watching a movie or something, that movie or whatever show it might be, it's not it's not translated into an indigenous language. So a lot of people want to, watch these shows, and the only languages that are available to watch these shows are in Spanish or English. So that might also be a reason why it discourages people to not want to, keep these languages alive, because there's no reason to, besides, it's an ancestral language, of course, right? It should be kept alive no matter what. But if there's no media for the young people, or there's no reason for the young people to want to keep these languages alive when Spanish is so dominant, right? Spanish is so dominant. I don't know. I just don't see a reason why these languages would keep surviving in the next 50 years, right? I could see these languages just completely die within 50 years, and Mexico just completely being a Spanish speaking country. And even like YouTubers, or at least people that I see in this space, they don't make videos in Nawa or in Mixtec or other languages. And it's just sad. But this comes back to also identifying as Native American, because if you were Native American and you try to seek your roots, and let's say you're from Yucatan, right? And maybe your parents migrated here, your second generation, third generation, or whatever it might be, but you now, look at your roots, and you realize that you're just Native American, not Hispanic, you're not Latino. You're just a brown Native American that has been told that they're Hispanic and Latino. And you go back, and you're going to feel a strong sense of wanting to learn this language, wanting to learn your culture, right? And you're going to want to preserve it and all these things. But that doesn't come from being called Hispanic or Latino. It comes from identifying as Native American because you have roots to this continent, right? You have roots to your ancestral home. You're not a stranger. Okay, so basically, as I was saying, that identifying as being Native American, it's a good thing. And yes, I keep repeating myself that being Native American is a big thing, because it really is. One thing I also want to talk about is when you see someone, right? Maybe especially if you're from the United States and you see somebody and they say, like, oh, you don't know how to speak Spanish, right? Oh, you're not Mexican, right? And it's like they might really not know how to speak Spanish, right? But you make fun of them, and because you feel like Spanish, well, it's Mexican, and you need to be a Spanish speaker to be Mexican, right? So you make fun of them, and you can even people even tell other people that you have a nopal en la frente, right? Meaning you get a cactus on your forehead, right? But what does that mean, right? Like, what does it mean how can you tell someone has a cactus on their forehead, right? Or it's a way of saying that, you're brown, right? It's basically just saying, I recognize you're a brown person. I can recognize you are Indigenous, right? Without saying you're Indigenous, they're telling you that you're Indigenous, right? If you're a brown person and you look Indigenous, they're going to say, why don't you speak Spanish, right? It's crazy, but it's a brainwash if you think about it, to tell somebody you have a cactus on your forehead, right, as a way of saying, you know what, you're Indigenous, how come you don't speak Spanish if you're from Mexico? But even that sentence alone it's weird. It's weird, right, to tell an Indigenous person. And if you're an Indigenous person, for one Indigenous person to tell another Indigenous person, you're Indigenous, how come you don't speak Spanish if you're from Mexico? It's almost like telling them you were colonized, and how come you don't speak your colonial language now that you're over here? You should always be colonized. No matter where you go, you have to be colonized, right? You see it on the media, right? If someone of Mexico doesn't have a Spanish name, it's weird, right? But it's the erasure of being Native American, right? You can be Native American and never recognize yourself as being Native American, right? And this is what they wanted, and this is what they got, right? Now it's what they got. Majority of Mexican people don't associate with being Native American. They don't recognize as being Native American. And if they do recognize being as Native American, they don't fully recognize as being Native American. They recognize themselves to be mestizo, right? But what does mestizo mean? It means you're half Spanish and you're half Native American. And you might be asking, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with identifying, as mestizo? If you recognize that, maybe your great grandpa was Spanish, and so you call yourself a mestizo. Well, what's wrong with that is, first off, if you recognize that people during the caste system in Mexico, the Spanish people had all the power, right? They took away the land, they they took away the resources, everything, right, from natives. So when these people have everything, right, they took advantage, right? They took advantage of the women, they took advantage of the men, they took advantage of everything, the labor, whatever it might be, right? So you saying, oh yeah, my grandpa is this, my grandpa was Spanish. You're basically saying, I recognize my grandpa probably raped my grandma or whatever it might be. And that's okay, but I'm still proud of being, maybe 20% Spanish, right? Because if you take a DNA test and you only know that your Spanish was or your great grandpa was Spanish, then you can tell that it was rape, right? Because if they only after that kept marrying or dating Native American, then more than likely that was rape, right? But if you still want to identify as mestizo, just remember that word was only there to identify people. If they mix with someone Spanish, then they're better than a Native American. The caste system wasn't created just to identify people. It was to identify people and marginalize them, right? So if you mixed with a black person, or if you mixed with an Asian, or you mixed with someone else that wasn't Spanish, you were below. But the person at the bottom was a Native American because they wanted to erase Native American history, culture, languages, whatever it might be. They wanted everything gone, right? And that's not only Mexico, that's also the United States, right? You have the boarding schools where there was a lot of rape, right? And there was a lot of murder, right? A lot of conversion of these Native American kids because, like I said, it's not just in Mexico, it's in the United States. And it was also in Canada, right? Even recently, they've discovered bodies of kids, right? In these boarding schools, right? And like I'm trying to tell you is that they want you guys to be erased. They want you to identify as Hispanic or Latino because that way they can tell you you're a stranger. You're not part of this content. You have no rights, right? You're not really part of this content. You're something else. You belong in Spain or you belong in Italy or wherever it might be, but not from here. You're not from here, right? So when you look at the Mexica or Mixtec or even the Mayans, that's not you. That's someone else, right? Even like Zapata, right? Someone very famous from Mexican history fought for indigenous rights, right? He's a brown, he's indigenous. He fought for indigenous rights, right? Because he fought the government because they were taking away the land from indigenous people and giving it to the Spanish, right? And that's what he fought for. Right? And I'll go in depth in the video on why Zapata was for indigenous people. But another thing with Zapata is that you can clearly see in indigenous communities in Mexico, I think in Chiapas, there's Zapatistas, right? And these Zapatistas, they're indigenous. I mean, they're all indigenous, right? And they call themselves Zapatistas, right? Didn't you think that they know that also Zapata was indigenous? He's not Hispanic, right? This isn't a Hispanic hero, Latino hero, right? It's kind of dumb to say that when people from Mexico recognize this guy as indigenous, right? This is an indigenous hero, right? But this video is actually pretty long, so I'll stop here. But I just wanted to go over again on why it's more important to identify as Native American than Hispanic or Latino. Thank you.